So, rather than doing a normal set review this time, given the, I guess the small amount of cards in this set, it being a mini set, sometimes they have a lot of cards, and it's worth talking about a lot. But this set review, if we did it in the normal way, we probably would have only rated 1 or 2 cards above like a 2 or 3 star. So we thought, okay, let's do this a bit differently. Let's try and stream it instead. Try and have a look at the cards live, and maybe take some chat questions about if there's anything in particular that people have pressing questions about Prismatic Evolutions in any card in particular. Without a doubt, the most impactful card that we have, or that we're going to talk about today, I'm pretty sure is going to be Budu. I'm going to be very open and honest in that I haven't really kept up with the Japanese meta over the past couple of months or so. So I'm here to learn almost as much as everyone else, I guess, from what you have kept up with, Joe, because I know you've been at least keeping an eye in preparation for, I guess, the next few tournaments, and ultimately UIC is, I guess, our big one that we're going to need to keep in mind. So yeah, Budu is the card that everyone's talking about. It's free retreating, free attacking, item locking Pokemon that theoretically can go in everything and anything. And seems to have been very divisive in whether it's good for the game, whether it's bad for the game, whether it's something that we need to be worried about. Joe, over to you. Do we need to be scared of this? Is this something that everything is playing in Japan, and we're entering a format over the next 2 years? Everything needs to think about Budu.
Yeah, I think rightfully so. I think it is really the elephant in the room of this set. It will be warping the current decks in the format, and I think you're right in that you can justify it in a ton of things. For the most part, the decks that I can see it like guaranteed in would be Gardevoir and Dragapult, and these are really picking up in popularity in Japan, and that's because these are decks that otherwise wouldn't really have anything to do on turn 1 going second, right? They would just use TM Evo in the best case scenario, but now they have a different approach, which is that you can go Budu and have this item locking effect, which can really disrupt a number of decks. And I think notably the V-Stars get impacted by this quite substantially. Regidrago can't easily use like its E-switches and get its combination going, and even just like Ultra Balling away its Dragon Mons, so it's far less reliable at doing the terrifying like Dragapult plays, or the Kieran plays, obviously are the ones you're most afraid of if you are these evolving decks. So an Itchy Pollen can help out against what is currently the best deck in our format. Drago does get substantially affected by Budu. Also, something like Lugia, as we know, it's inconsistent, and a lot of the time after an Itchy Pollen, they're going to be forced to read the wind rather than V-Star up and do everything and start swinging with an Iron Hands. So the stage 2, like slower decks like Guardian and Pult definitely welcome this card. But also they can play well into Budu as well, in that Gardevoir has Monkey Dory that can KO it like mid-turn, and Dragapult can push it out the way and use that for damage counter placement for an easy prize. So its low hit points is like a downside. But those decks are going to be the ones like guaranteed to play it. I also think Ceruledge is like an up-and-comer. We've seen that in the City Leagues. It also had a big placement in Osaka, which is pretty much the best indicator of this format because it was a 5,000 player tournament in Japan. So that's a really good indication of like high level play, I think, even though it is best of 1 and there's going to be a lot of RNG, and we only know the top 16 of this 5,000 player tournament. It's not the full picture in any means, but the fact that Ceruledge could go that far, and the fact that it's also being replicated in City Leagues even still, show that this is another great user of Budu, in that, again, it was a stage 1 that didn't do anything on its turn other than just announcing pass most of the time, or like maybe like a Rotom or something like that in strange cases. But now you can easily retreat the 1 retreat cost Charcadets and go Budu, and maybe that means that you're then going to be the aggressor on the following turn because someone's been slowed down to not get their optimal turn going, and then suddenly Ceruledge is pushing its ridiculous damage output. And at the same time, Charcadets can KO Budu thanks to the fire weakness. There's a Charcadet that does 1 for 20, and it's a fire type, so it can KO Budu. So if you get faced with a Budu, you're taking the prize, and you can keep a 1 prize board state, and that can mean that you're just staying on top and unfazed by their lock, essentially. The same thing could be said for Archludon. Obviously, it is like very item reliant, but in the face of exactly Budu, you can keep a 1 prize board state, just go Duraludon, and just use the 1 for 30 attack to take the KO. So that's a really, really big deal, and why those decks are probably going to be rising in stocks, and possibly why or some of the reason why Archludon Dialga won the Osaka tournament, because firstly, it's more favorable into something like Dragapult, where you have healing, so obviously, but also that you don't care about Budu in either Guardi or Pult, which is like their new kind of defense mechanism. One other thing that I forgot to mention about Gardevoir actually is that Guardi Banette was an archetype. Seeing how good Monkey Dory plus Banette was as a combination to buy time with Countercatcher or Boss or all this other stuff, even like Gravity Gemstone, for example. And now every Gardevoir deck has that dimension, quite similar really to how Morwile has been coming into Gardevoirs recently to buy yourself those cheat turns essentially and get Monkey Dory doing its nasty business. Now Budu can do the same thing, and that's just like a mode that Gardevoir can go into at any point in games. In panic situations or just to math fix, you can like use Monkey Dory for a turn, Itchy Pollen, buy that space with a Countercatcher, and then suddenly like the board state can swing. So Gardevoir is like a much more dangerous deck, and it has defense plays against what's probably the best deck in Regidrago, but then also you collateral rare candy, of course. So the stage 2 that's not so happy about this is probably Charizard. Probably has to adapt with Great Tree or either that or going back to TM evolution of its own, although it's far less effective than something like a Guardia or a Pult, which love using TM Evo because their stage 1s are busted. But also things like Togekiss or more notably probably Dusknoir. These are collateraled by the fact that Budu is going to be around, because a lot of the reason why Dusknoir was good, especially looking back at like Palkia Dusknoir, for example, is that if you were the player going first and you got that like devastating turn 2 board position just by high rolling candies, you could wipe a board state, and now a Budu can safeguard you from that, which is a really big deal actually. So it feels like we're making the game like far less explosive, but Budu isn't like completely meta warping in a bad way, I don't think, because at the end of the day you're just representing that one prizer. You're hoping to be the aggressor, and then still you can get railroaded by like hand disruption and stuff, and the game sort of flows out of the Budu moment. And there's enough archetypes that can weave in Monkey Dory. Like it's not just Gardevoir that uses Monkey. We're even seeing things like Ancient Box use Monkey Dory, for example, because you can get hit with a couple Itchy Pollens, and then you can just throw it back to them and then actually get an attack in for the turn as well. So there's going to be some interesting like counterplay. I think the main things to note is that Guardian Pulse will be going up in play. Regidrago notably will be going down in play. It also can't really use Budu very effectively. Like, yes, there's Cleffa in Drago, but I think Cleffa's still better than Itchy Pollen, because Drago would much rather save its V-Star power and like use Cleffa to gain hand advantage than use Itchy Pollen and like hope for a 1-card top deck or still be forced to V-Star on turn 2. It's still more valuable to like save your V-Star for a checkmate, I would say. So there's going to be a lot of adaptation. I think Drago and Zard being the best performers right now in Surging Sparks will be dipping, but I feel like the main beneficiaries will be Guardi Pult, probably Archludon and Ceruledge, when we're looking exactly at Budu. Mm-hmm. Was there anything I missed the first time around, Jack?
I don't think so.
Now?
I don't think so. It makes a lot of sense. I think the only thing that, or I guess you kind of touched on my next question.
Chat's anything good?
Nothing at the moment. I think the thing that I wanted to gauge, I guess, was, and you kind of touched on it right at the end, but I think there's some people that were and maybe still are. I think it's kind of died down a little bit, maybe a bit of a storm in a teacup, but we're really worried about this and really worried about the toxicity of item lock, and particularly item lock that is so accessible to, like you say, there's decks that it definitely is less suited for, but theoretically can go into anything. You could play against eight Budus 8 rounds in a row, and like this is a card that can go into everything. But you kind of touched on it there, I guess, that it's like it's not necessarily something that we need to be worried about. There's going to be decks that can abuse it. There's going to be decks that can't abuse it, as well as the decks that can abuse it. But it's not like it's like you do give up something to be able to get this thing into the active on your turn, and there's some decks that will be able to do that. And I guess as an outsider looking into how the city leagues and stuff have gone, and how the Champions League in Osaka went, I think that's kind of indicated that it's also not necessarily, well, I think there's going to be an element of skill testing to when you have to stop that lock and actually then start, like you said with the Ancient Box example, you can Itchy Pollen, and because you're a one prize deck, it's maybe a little bit less exasperated because you're always giving up one prize anyway. But particular decks like Dragapult and Gardevoir, where they will have 2 prize liabilities on the bench and even sometimes 2-prize attackers in Dragapult's case, I think there will be an element of skill testing to being able to switch off the Budu mode and into, okay, now I'm going to race you. I've bought my 2 turns. I've got my setup. Now we're back to a 6-prize race. So I think, like, as an outsider looking in, I'm not massively worried. I think there have been times when I guess item lock has been oppressive and not a particularly enjoyable part of the format. But I think it's been a long time since we've had that, and I'm not worried about how that's going to look. Tim Rockets just asked in the chat, how do you think Budu is going to affect deck building overall? I know you talked a little bit about TM Evo and stuff like that. Do you think TM Evo, more evolutions, that's going to be a lot of what these decks do?
TM Evo is an insanely good response to an Itchy Pollen. So you still develop your board pretty nicely. I could see it in Golden Go. I could see it in Guardian Pole, obviously. Even Charizard to an extent. Even though I don't think it's like Charizard is probably one of the weakest, right? Because you play a low energy count, you want to stay a low energy count, and the stage ones don't really do anything for you. But also that could also mean that things like Jamming Tower get better. That's why we saw Archludon play Jamming Tower, in my opinion. Like, yes, it collaterals Forest Hill Stone, but I think the main thing here is that you're trying to stop TM Evo from some of these archetypes. So there's going to be some of that interaction going on as well, which I think is kind of interesting, being brought into the game. I also really like the point of you mentioning the skill testing nature of this card for both players, really, because I actually recorded all of the Osaka Day 2 and never actually got time to edit it before I left on holiday, unfortunately. But there were definitely moments in games where I was thinking that it's time to go in for one player and they would hold back and then got punished, or there were times when an opponent would like still charge through a Budu, but because they didn't have items, they like walked into an unfair stamp or walked into a Iono having not developed enough in the back, and then suddenly the Iono KO gets them. So it will be an interesting challenge. I actually think it makes Unfair Stamp a much better card as well, actually, which is kind of interesting. Just the wielder of Budu can do that, let that be the prize, and then suddenly they're stamping the opponent that couldn't get fully developed and found some way to KO Budu. So that's also quite interesting. One other thing that I don't know too much about is how it affects Snorlax. Like, Snorlax is obviously very item reliant right now, but it could go back to a higher just like boss count rather than counter catcher count. So I don't know its impact on stall enough just yet. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that I need to think about a little bit more, which is kind of interesting. But I also think there'll be just more like Monkey Dory stuff going on, which I also think is just another like great skill testing card, because Monkey Dory is good against Dragapult naturally, and now it's good against Budu, especially like I mentioned Ancient Box, but also just like Roaring Moon can have Monkey Dory now because Budu's hitting 20 with the grass weakness, which is quite funny. So it only takes a couple Itchy Pollens for then the Budu to like KO itself with the Monkey Dory mid-turn, and that can be bad. So there's going to be some really interesting stuff there, I think. And we haven't mentioned like one of the other good cards of Prismatic Evolutions, which is like Gigas, which also impacts Charizard quite importantly, but also Lugia. I was saying that the V-Stars don't like being hit with Itchy Pollen, but Lugia like also gains cards itself, and at the end of the day it can still read the wind if it has to into Itchy Pollen to like still get something going. So pretty interesting on that front. And also there's a weird thing about the sort of switch effects and a few other things in like Raging Bolt and stuff. I think there might also be a move towards Latias EX in a lot of the basic attacking decks, just so you can still maneuver against the Budu.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. There was one other question I was going to ask about Budu. What was it? That was the question. Obviously a skill testing card. People always talk about how fast/slow a format is. This seems like it's slowing down the format. Like you said, it means that things are potentially less explosive. Do you think that it means some of these decks, and they're not maybe as successful as they have been? I think we're finally starting to see a dip in the likes of things like Raging Bolt anyway. But do you think it slows down these decks enough that we have what we would consider a slower format, or is this still like I think there's a really interesting conversation about how fast and slow formats are, and I actually think it's a bit of a myth as to what the speed of a format is and isn't. I think it's I think it's a bit of a myth anyway, and I think it actually doesn't vary anywhere near as much as people think it does. But a card like Budu, slowing your opponent down, meaning that decks like Dragapult and Guardi maybe get into the game a bit more, that are decks that sometimes still win the game in 2 or 3 turns, but typically need a couple of turns of setup to be able to then do that. I would say seems like an indicator of a game slowing down, even if not by more than a turn.
Yeah, I think it is around that turn. I think oftentimes Budu is trying to buy exactly a turn. There are situations where someone's happy to keep announcing Itchy Pollen until the opponent deals with it.
Yeah.
So in that case, it could be like a 3+ turn game, but it's not like they're going to be 10-minute turns. It's like you're locking the opponent, just moving a damage counter up 10, and hoping that you top deck out of a bad situation, or like maybe you're evolving extra guys and getting extra refinements or recons in or something like that. So it's not like going to extend games by like 5 or 10 minutes. Well, it could extend it by like maybe 5 minutes, but it's not going to turn everything into a 10-turn game. I think Guardi's the only one that's a bit more nuanced, because at any point they can Night Stretcher back Budu, Countercatcher, and be like, haha, it's time to put the brakes on here for a couple turns while I reestablish X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
That's the only deck that I think will have more modality to it. Whereas I think for most other decks playing a Budu, like certainly like Ceruledge, for example, if it doesn't do it turn 1 going second, it'll just yeet Budu and say, not this game, I'll try again later.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And also there's also an element of that which is like similar to how like Manaphy is in evolution decks, is that even though there is this Budu, there's going to be a ton of hands or a ton of board states where you won't want to do this card anyway. So it's not like every turn item block is coming down on you and suddenly the game is completely based on if you have like one of your 4 research in hand. I don't think that's the doomsday element of it. I feel like there's going to be good enough hands that can retreat into Budu, can use it. Or also it could be panic stations. Like if you have 1 Ralts, 1 Nest Ball, and you're up against a bunch of these matchups, it's probably better for you to go Budu and hope that Itchy Pollen saves you more than 1 turn than just getting a second Ralts and hope they still don't have the best turn possible that can take a double KO. So I think it's gonna... It's weird in that it's going to be used in very, very good hands, and then in those hands where you need to buy lots of turns and you need to still high roll from the Itchy Pollen by stopping the opponent for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's not. Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about item lock turn 2 every game, every deck.
Yeah, I think that's another really interesting point about the opportunity cost of getting a Budu out instead of another basic is also another skill testing element to Budu. Can I afford a Budu here, or do I need another routes? Do I even have the ball search to be able to find Budu? Or like you say in that Ceruledge instance, if I can only find 1 basic, it's got to be a Charcadet, because otherwise I lose the game anyway, potentially. So maybe I just have to find a Charcadet and we chalk up, we're not going to Budu this game. Or like you said, maybe you go, I can't win with 1 Charcadet here, so I'm going to get none, I'm going to Budu, and I'm going to try and lock my way to the point where I then have 2 or 3 Charcadet, and then I'm going to lean on the fact that I've given up 1 prize and the rest of the game I can play as a 2 prize deck if I can. So yeah, it's a really interesting card. I'm very interested to see how it falls, and I think there's a lot less. I think the panic is hopefully a bit of a storm in the teacup, I guess.
So my only fear is that this is here for 2 years. That's my only fear. I have no instant fear about this card. And obviously because we're coming to a rotation, we could easily come into a cycle where more like search style supporter effects come out in the format. So I think it's going to be like a shift in the supporters that we know are good in format right now. Things like Arven, that's been good for so long, that's been like, let's grab an item and a tool. We could start seeing the staple supporter being like, for example, the Brock that I think is coming out at some point. Like, that's not an amazing card, but if we have a ton of item lock, and like as soon as they print a card like this, they can freely print item lock in all sorts of ways, and we start shifting towards different supporter effects in the game and have like different abilities as well. We already see like a ton of draw and search abilities from the latest set post rotation. So I think the landscape will shift, and I don't have a huge amount of fear for this over a 2-year span, because they're probably going to incorporate, like, they can only print this card when a rotation's coming. But it essentially just warps their design process for 2 years. But if it ever does become a problem, I could easily see this being like a hit card, because We've seen that Toad did become a problematic card. They're obviously like very, very different situations. Part of the reason why Toad was so crazy was it was also the highest hit point Pokemon in the game, and you could mod it in all sorts of ways. And one of the best damage mods happened to be an item, so you're getting the best mod in the game for you and stopping the opponent from having the best mod in the game. So there's a lot of nuance to like why this is like completely different to Toad. And the most obvious one is that you're a wimpy 30 hit point guy.
Yeah, I think it's just the final point I make is I think it's this is a great way to do it, because it means that all these evolution decks that are hurt by not being able to candy anymore, like it's only going to take a couple of turns for a Charmander to deal. Well, a Charmander in particular probably won't struggle, but like a Roltz to deal with this, or any of these evolving stage 2s that we have. At least they can like reasonably see the light at the end of the tunnel by just attaching an energy and dealing 10 a turn, because at the end of the day that's only 3 turns, and yes, again, opportunity cost of what those 3 turns cost you. But like you say, when Toad had 180 HP and you couldn't do anything and you couldn't mod your damage, and it took a few turns to be able to get to the point where you were even two-shotting that was when it caused some headaches. So yeah, I can see that. So yeah, very, very interesting card. Probably the card we'll spend the most time talking about today. Next up, I'm not going to group all the evolutions entirely, but I think personally, looking at them, I think there's only 2 that are worth talking about, other than Sylveon, who I think we've already talked about and has seen a little bit of play here and there. I think there's only 2 worth talking about, which are Jolteon and Flareon, personally. I don't know whether you have any. Okay, that's
outside of type coverage. I definitely agree.
Yeah. I think it's a couple of things, I guess, on the collective. I obviously want to talk a little bit about the Eevee as well, because the Eevee is also worth talking about in its own right. But there's great. It's really good to see the type coverage. I like that they all have relatively easy attack costs, attack costs that are not stupid, or at least one of their attacks is not stupid. You can theoretically, like you say, play them as type coverage options, which is cool. And I like that those attacks aren't also just 2 for 40s or whatever. They're actually, half relevant. In fact, I think in a lot of cases, they're actually quite strong for this type of card that we usually see. But I think the only 2 that are ever going to be part of a deck in their own right is Flareon and Jolteon, because they, I think, have the 2 first attacks that are definitely worth talking about, or definitely overtuned compared to some of the other stuff. Flareon, obviously, I guess we'll touch on first. 2 for 130 and letting you search for 2 basic energy and attach to one of your Pokemon is actually really good energy acceleration, even on a stage 1, especially given that we can accelerate to this, we can evolve this quite quickly. This actually can get into attacking turn 1 in some instances, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you think we're powering up with this has been basically the question I've been struggling with.
I think, it's either other evolutions or possibly Gigas. Okay. I think are probably the best things you could power up. The combination of Flareon and Gigas means that, Flareon can hit 280, which is V-Stars and Basics, and then Gigas can reach the Terras, which is most stage 2s, right? You're just missing on Guardy at that point. That would be the only thing I would think about. Or, like you said, if you're going to have Jolteon and Flareon in the same deck, that's something as well you could think about, because they share the same energy cost for the second attack. You pointed this out, that the Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon actually as well, they all have the same second energy attack cost. They're just called different names. But yeah, it's really weird, because I like the idea of the combo nature of this. I really like the idea of having some type coverage elements. These EVs don't boast good types for the most part, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, that Flareon attack, we've seen that effect in the past, and it's been absolutely crazy good. And you could see a build where you have like Squawkabilly, Carmine, Eevee, Trumpet, and try and get a turn 1 Flareon, because obviously there's the old Eevee that can evolve on the first turn, or the turn you play it. So it is possible to make that happen, and Trumpet can be extra acceleration that can go onto this and to Gigas, which is cool. So that would be what I would think about. But it's weird to say that it's still slow to do this attack.
Yeah.
Like, you don't really want to set up a 130. Like, setting up a 130 could be good into like a stage 2 maybe, but that situation's not going to present itself too much, and possibly just doing that one attack for 130 already means the opponent's gone, okay, I'm taking my first 2 prizes on this Flareon, and I'm going to find my way to more 2 prizes from there. So it could actually still be too slow.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a worry in the format, really.
The immediate comparison, and you'll have to correct me if there's been something more recently, but the immediate comparison is obviously this is exactly what Mega Manetric did, right? And Mega Manetric was really strong. But the difference is, like, when you compare Mega Manetric to this, yes, this has, I think, did Mega Man have 210, maybe? I can't remember how much, but it's
210.
So it's got 60 more HP, but it only does 20 more damage. And that card's 10 years old now, so it's not really been scaled up. Now, Mega Man was really strong, but also it was really strong because it was ahead of its time, whereas this, I think, like you say, has fallen behind its time because it's not like Burning Charge is even pressuring 2 shots, which Mega Man was. It was pressuring a lot of VXs for 2 shots, even some Megas for 2 shots. And it was also at a time where there wasn't a huge amount of one-shotting, particularly one-shotting anywhere near as quickly as we have in this format, which meant Mega Man could run things like Max Potion or whatever, and it could be a tanky deck, whereas Flareon, even 270 is a bit like, oh, I don't know whether I'm actually going to be surviving a turn here. So yeah, it's really interesting how an identical attack that, like, Mega Man didn't shape the format, but it was a very big part of the format. It also had great type coverage, which Flareon doesn't have, so that's key to remember.
Yeah, that was key. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really interesting that, like you say, it's still super slow.
Maybe when if the hop deck becomes really popular, then it's a check to Zacian, which is kind of interesting. That's one thing that I could think about just on the type coverage for now, but. Yeah, fire typing's not what you want to be, really.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, I also agree. I really like the fact that Carnelian, or whatever we end up seeing it being called in English, I like that it feels like you say, they're obviously very aware of the cards they're printing, but it feels like that, and even things like this 280 number keeps coming up. Like we saw, slacking didn't go anywhere, but like they're identifying that 280 is a number to be pushing the V-Stars out of the format, and I'm glad we're seeing it on more cards, because I think we've got rotation regardless, but I think it makes rotation, like if they print it on more and more cards and these cards are good, it ends up making rotation feel less impactful. I still think this is probably going to be, in my opinion, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, rotations we've had in a long time, maybe ever, to be honest. I think it's actually up there as one of the biggest ever, with the amount of success some of the V-Stars have seen as of late. But also, like, I really like the self-awareness of, like, we know 280 was the number for Sword and Shield. Now we're up to 330, 340, wherever we're at now, like, and that will be the next number we have to deal with going forward. But yeah, I like that self-awareness that we're like, these Pokemon are here to stay, and we're not trying to push these V-Stars anymore, which is good. Yeah, similarly, Jolteon, like, that's the other thing about Jolteon, right? I can see it working with a Flareon. I think there's a couple of other interesting ways you can be accelerating to the bench to boost Flashing Spear's damage. It does 240, which is an okay number. It deals with all of the basic EXs for the most part, which is really good. I guess it struggles when we start getting into the Stage 1s, but it has Dravolite, so can deal with those. Then again, maybe we have to look into type coverage for some of the Stage 2s, or whether we have another way of dealing with the Stage 2s. Does this see play anywhere outside? Like, does it see play as its own deck with things like, what am I thinking of? Electric Generator and stuff as the acceleration to try and keep up is the only thing I can think, other than like Burning Charge and I guess other trumpets
still as well, right?
Other trumpets to your EVs that can also turn into more Jolteons if this gets knocked out.
Yeah, that's the main thing I see. Like, maybe a Noctowl Jolteon thing where you can get multiple trumpets going. I can't, like, this is too high maintenance to try and do a turn 1 attack. I think it's actually really similar to Reshiram, that classic flopped deck. Everyone loves it. I'm not too excited by Jolteon. We already have some good, like, type coverage lightning guys in the format that aren't doing too much. So I'm much more passionate about the Flareon than the Jolteon. Yeah. And it would just be exactly type coverage that makes me look at Jolt, to be honest.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. The other aspect is, like, I struggle to find reason to play Jolteon over Miraidon in almost any capacity, even though it's an extra energy or whatever. Like, we've seen how quick Miraidon can be. We've seen how successful Miraidon can be in this format already. Yes, again, caught in the crossfire of not being able to Generator and stuff like that because of Budu or whatever. But I think there's a really I've struggled to find, I guess, compelling reasons to not see Jolteon as anything more than an evolution in an evolutions deck for type coverage, like you say. When if I want to play a lightning deck, there's so many good ways of playing lightning decks right now. So yeah, it's interesting. Luke's just said difference is Mega Man couldn't OHKO everything, whereas this can. Luke, do you think this is? I'll let you chat and we can carry on. But
I know Luke really likes Flareon.
I can see
he's saying that obviously that second attack is something that puts it very different from Megametric.
Yeah,
but I think you're just comparing the first attack, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think I made the point anyway that one turn of not taking 2 prizes is usually a death sentence when you're representing 2 prizes. Obviously, there's a bit more nuance because you're evolving from a single prize Pokemon and you're going to be accelerating 2 single prize Pokemon, so there'll be a bit of that. And it's a fire type, so there's Radzard for at least a little window of opportunity. So he's obviously going to come out with more nuance than that if we get into a deep conversation about it. But and I suppose it is relevant that in a high roll situation, this can still hit that 280 turn 1 if you really have to. The Jolteon would probably be the more reasonable way of doing that because it would be just 2 trumpets required. Well, I guess both are 2 trumpets required, but you get to keep the energy on your Jolt, which would be really, really good if you were going for like a turn 1 2 prize play.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. In terms of the other EVs, anything else worth mentioning, do you think?
Well, Leafeon's green, so if Charizard isn't dipping, I would at least look at
that. Was
card.
the other identification I made, though. Even so, like Verdant Storm, they still need to over-attach. Like, as soon as they see you're an EV deck, they just limit themselves to 2, right? And
plus, I mean, Charizard should be dipping anyway because of Budu, so I don't even care about that too much. I think the rest is really bad.
Yeah, I was severely underwhelmed with these EVs, I must admit. I think
the attack costs are just wild. Like, I know that's the whole gimmick of these Stellar Terrors or whatever, but they are so not worth it.
I'm disappointed that they didn't have at least one consistent energy type, so you could more feasibly play an Evolutions deck and not have the headache of you need to play 5 different types of energy to be able to play the Evolutions deck. I think that would have been really nice to, even if it ended up being a low tier deck, I think it would have been really nice to be able to play 4 EVEX, 4 EV, which is something that we haven't really been able to do before, which is kind of an issue with these Evolution type decks, is that you're really limited on the number of basics you have. Being able to play both of those, and then, if we'd had some kind of consistency between their strong attacks, it would have been really cool to see, like, an Evolutions box, but I think that's, even if it just ended up being like a mid to low tier, but I think the complexities of their attacks means that it's probably almost impossible.
Just a quick, like, ridiculous comparison to show like how passive they're going with this. Umbreon has a 3 energy attack that requires it to discard all energy just to take a prize.
Yeah.
And Kartana GX did that for 1 metal energy. I know it was a GX attack, but like that was on a basic that had a sick ability that came into play for 1 energy.
Yeah.
That's such a stark difference.
Similarly,
to take a prize card. That's so much. It's insane.
Similarly, Espeon EX's attack to devolve everything and shuffle everything into deck. Shuffling everything into deck is like not irrelevant compared to just normal devolve, but Espeon EX was a basic that devolved everything. We have TM Devolution, and a lot of the time, like, yes, you can use this more aggressively to slow them down, whereas like with TM Devo, you have to be taking knockouts because otherwise they just re-evolve. Sure, there are nuances, but regardless, like, they are 80% of the time the exact same attack. Yet TM Devo costs 1 colorless energy, and this costs 3 different colored energy. It's like, it's crazy to me. And I just can't figure it out, because especially given that they're EVs, and I think everybody loves the Evolutions, right? It would have been brilliant to see some of these more playable. But I will be surprised if we actually ever see anything crazy from any of these.
The only thing I can think of is they're scared of like Crisping Crystal being too good if any of these were like a little bit higher tuned, but they've really just said no. Let's make these collector cards only.
And again, Crispin Crystal. Like, I think Crispin Crystal is probably something that actually just gets better the further we get into, or the more terrors there are. Though I have a sneaking like, we haven't seen any terrors from the new set yet, which is quite interesting. I think that is actually a very potentially very scary combo for them to have to think about. Like that's a lot of energy acceleration, and when the gimmick is really good attacks, but they're locked behind very complicated energy costs, that's a really scary prospect to push. But like you say, even so, these are still they're still stage ones. Yes, there's quick ways of evolving them, but they're still stage ones. There's still so many hoops you have to jump through before you can even get to thinking about whether Crispin Crystal gets you there anyway. That it's really bizarre. But hey ho, we're not card designers, I guess. The other thing that I think is, I guess, worth mentioning is the EVEX. Again, I don't think we've kind of already touched on it, but it's cool being able to play 4 EV and 4 EVEX, and that's, I think, has always been one of the issues with Evolution decks, especially when they've been in a more splashable form. Unfortunately, this time it turns out there's no great things there's not many great things to evolve into, so it feels like kind of wasted potential.
It would have been nice if there was bench sitting ones that had abilities that could help out the others. We've seen that in previous EVs before, but all of these only have attacks, so there's no reason to flood your board with all of these.
Yeah, it feels like there's so many compelling parts about this. Like EVEX is a big, you can play EVEX instead of having to play the EV, which is a low HP basic in a really aggressive format and a format that has lots of damage counter manipulation, stuff like that. But then there's nothing to go there's no reason to do that, and then we'll lose EVX, and the next time we see EVs it will just be a 60 HP basic. Then they'll never see play because 60 HP basic is way too squishy to ever reliably be able to be played. So it feels like there's so many things they did right, and yet so many things that still didn't, I guess, come to fruition. There's an 80 HP Hoot Hoot, which I'm almost certain is worse than every other Hoot Hoot we have because it can't be Buddy Poffined.
Yeah, that's really bad. It can still be you can still pop in fan rotom, I suppose.
You can fan, but I think everyone's kind of we've identified the breakpoint is 60 to 70 rather than 70 to 80, right? So it turns out not not to be too important. I did unintentionally brush over Seeking. It's a minor buff for the Festival Grounds deck. Anything more to say than that?
Is that a buff?
It can't. It can't not.
Yeah.
I mean, sure. I'm not convinced. Gigas is a draw engine, yeah. In your deck that tutors lots of different cards anyway.
Terrible.
Excuse me. Gigas is the other big Pokemon of the set, or the other big one prizer of the set with its Jewel Breaker, dealing an absurd amount of damage, to be quite honest. It feels quite targeted, this attack. We usually see these attacks really towards the end of a format's life, or the end of a block, but they've come for Charizard swinging halfway through the Scarlet and Violet lifespan. What do you think of this? I can see it. Basically, I think for me, it's an instant. It seems to be like an instant plop straight into Lugia. Feels like a really strong Lugia card. Potentially, I could see some argument for it in some other decks that have energy acceleration, but a lot of our energy acceleration right now is very type specific. So this being a colorless type is great because it can go into anything, but it actually makes it hard to accelerate to outside of just Lugia. Does this see play in anything else? Do you think this is, or do you think this is just another tool for Lugia's card as it has its last hurrah?
I think definitely consideration in Lost Zone Box. We've seen Lost Zone Box play Pika, and this is like a one prize Pika, if a bit more effort, obviously. But that has the flexible acceleration that you're thinking about. Yep. I have seen more roguish builds of Charizard using this, because Charizard is a terrible Dragapult matchup, but you can use Gigas to bonk early game Dragapults, which is pretty crazy that Charizard can't reach. Obviously, it forces you to have a lot of pieces and stuff. But yeah, I think those are the main ones that I've seen. I think it's mostly a Lugia card personally, but it's really good in Lugia. Really, really good. It's a space cheater, so you can go no rat, or you could go 1/1 or 2/2 rat, and feel super happy with that. I actually quite like playing 0 Chinchino now. This is a cheaper Chinchino. Maybe it makes Thornton a better card as well. And it means you can comfortably sit at 15 energy in Lugia, which doesn't sound like much, but anytime you can wiggle a ball space into the list or something like that, makes me feel a lot more comfortable with the deck. So gaining spaces back from Lugia is like a big sigh of relief, I think. So the deck plays a bit better now and just has a crazy attacker.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I don't think there's much more to say about this, to be honest. I am curious as to, and I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but from a card design perspective, do you like counters like this, or do you prefer, like, this feels, whilst this can hit for other stuff, it feels super targeted, right? It feels like I'm going to say knee-jerk reaction to Charizard, but the Charizard era I felt like was 8 or 9 months ago now, which is the natural delay on cards coming out. Like, that doesn't surprise me.
Well, it's weird because I don't think it's actually that Charizard targeted. They've printed grass types like quite blatantly for the last like 6 months. I think this is more of a Pult. I think this is more Dragapult actually, because this is a Dragapult doesn't get hit for weakness, so you have to print the big number.
Yeah, very true.
So I actually think it's a Dragapult target. Mm-hmm. Ironically, Lugia already batters Pult, so it didn't need this.
But it's something at least that people
those
can go
other
forward.
decks those handful of other decks could try and use this. I'm actually really interested in how Charizard Pult plays now. I haven't seen much of it, but it actually really interests me because that matchup was pretty bad for Charizard, and obviously you still have to worry about Budu stuff, I suppose, but this could be a way to maybe balance that matchup.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of it for the Pokemon. There are a couple more that we'll take a look at once we've done a few of these trainers, but for the large part, that's kind of all the interesting stuff. The rest of the stuff is super generic, like 2 for 40s, 3 for 60s kind of stuff, or reprints, which is good to have. I think we're getting some pretty key reprints. Benji, thanks for the 300 bits. Appreciate it. We're getting some pretty good reprints as well. This is, if you can somehow get hold of this set, this is actually a really good set for stocking up on staples. There's some really good trainers. I think there's even some of the Ogre-Pons and stuff, which are increasingly more difficult, increasingly more expensive at the moment because of how popular Drago and Bolt were. I think they've probably peaked and have started coming down now, but they're definitely going to come down now. But yeah, so it's a really interesting set. Onto the trainers, our final 2 A-Specs, it looks like. There's been no A-Specs from Journey Together, and there's no space for any, so I think we're done with A-Specs. And I think we've really fizzled out with these last 2. I don't think these are personally anything I mean, they kind of sold us up a river when they printed Prime Catcher as the first one. We were always going to be hoping for something somehow better than Guzma on an item card, and there's been, in all fairness, there's been some really good A-Specs, and ones that, like, this has not been I think when everyone saw Prime Catcher, they were like, well, what's the point in printing any other A-Spec? But credit where credit's due, there's some really good A-Spec. Like, Prime Catcher is in nowhere near as many decks as I expected it would be because of how solid other A-Specs are. So, yeah, credit where credit's due. That being said, I do not think either of these are particularly impressive to write home about.
No. So the Max Rod chooses up to 5 named combination of Pokemon and basic energy from your discard and put them into your hand. So we know that effect is crazy actually on an item, obviously. Because it's a +1 on Clara, right?
Yeah.
And it's direct to hand is really, really crazy. There are some interesting like cards that discard themselves, like Starmie as a damage mod and stuff like that. So getting a huge chunk of those things back into the hand is very cool. We do have Lana's Aid already in the format, and it does nothing. But that's a little bit more limited because it can't get rule box Pokemon. The issue is with Super Rod and with Night Stretcher in the format, with such good ball search in the format, I don't think there's much need for a card like this. Now, maybe in a real dreamer scenario, there's like a way that we can formulate a deck like Trolley in the past where the engine wasn't established, wasn't known, but I haven't seen a way to make Max Rod like really crazy where you get like a full Dust Noir line back and all this other stuff and do crazy turns. I don't see it being a huge thing, but like the interesting design space for future is things like, it just reminded me of the there was a deck that used an attack that could recover loads of cards in the discard pile. I can't remember what it is now, but there was also the shock lock that used like hydrogen to keep discarding its own guys, and like there's creative space for this card to be like a cracked card because it is so much burst value. You're gaining 4 cards for 1, which is really, really big burst recovery. So I know that people like Sander are going to find weird infinite loops with this card just because you get so much stuff back, like value wise.
Yeah,
it's a really like it stands out massively with how much value one card can get you.
I agree. It's also, and I very much don't use this as a blanket statement because some of the best A specs we've got are reactive, think unfair stamp, stuff like that. But it's also super reactive, right? But it's not only reactive, it's reactive in a way that also requires you to have other, like, you need to get something from the max rod to then react. It's like a reactive card that then needs to do something further, whereas unfair stamp is reactive, but the card itself is doing something, right? So it's like max rod is only online sometimes. I guess unfair stamp is, but like unfair stamp when it's online is always doing something powerful, whereas max rod sometimes will not be online. You won't be able to get your dust knot back yet, whatever. So yeah, it feels super reactive. But yeah, I think out of the two, this is obviously one that I could see niche homes in for this in the same way that I guess some other A specs have found a home in a particular archetype. Yeah, basically looking at you, Sander, for some kind of broken infinite loop with this. But Treasure Gadget, anything you want to... I think it's actually called Treasure Tracker, which I will say is a better name in English. I do like that.
Great. Treasure Tracker. Yeah, I'm up for that. I'm not sure what synergies there are. I think
I can't even think of
like Rotom V-Star is one that I can think about.
There we go.
Maybe, I think there's an Electrode that can do some stuff.
I was trying to think about whether we had any the one that immediately comes to mind that isn't in format anymore, but the Pachirisu that was tool drop or whatever. Like I don't think we have any actually.
So there's a one prize Electrode that could go with like leftovers Snorlax, I suppose, and the gadget gets you to like 220 damage, I think, for 1 lightning on a 1 prize deck. Is there like a Garbodor as well? I'm just trying to look through PKMN cards now. I think there's a Garb that does 50x the tools you discard from hand. So
chat, how are we breaking this card? There must be someone in chat that knows about treasure tracking.
Yeah, there's going to be some wonderful, wacky treasure tracking thing.
This feels like a PDCG live stream card and nothing more
100%.
than that. Yeah. There's a
Gorgeist.
Oh, of course, Rab knows that.
Let me find that.
Garbodor is broken.
While I'm here.
But searching for 5 tools. The other, like, tools are also tools as a card are also a card that has tools have so much diminishing returns because you can only attach 1 tool in 99.9% of cases. I know some of the other stuff like Reverie X or whatever, but tools have such diminishing returns. You really don't want to have to play a huge amount of them in your deck anyway, because eventually you get to a critical mass of tools where you actually just can't play the cards anymore because all of your Pokemon have tools on them. So yeah, I feel like this was almost an A spec to put a big number with a type of card that they knew was never going to be, like, they knew this card was never ever going to be an issue, right? Because of the nature of finding 5 tools not being particularly powerful. So I almost feel like this was a bit of a throwaway A spec, like some of the others have been. Like Amulet of Hope, for example, it was never going to see huge amounts of play, but it's really cool to be able to find a tool card that lets you search for 3 cards when you get knocked out or whatever. So yeah, it feels like a bit of a throwaway A spec, but yeah. Any luck on finding that Gorgeist, Joe? Do we know what that does?
Nope. Don't even know if there's one in format that relates to tools, to be honest. I don't know what that was about.
You're a fraud.
It might be thinking of a different Pokemon. I'm not sure, though. Maybe I just missed it. But yeah, like you said, there's been these meme garbage tier style things around that people have probably experimented with, and now you can not have to play 18 tools just so that you have the immediacy of doing the thing with your tools. Now you can play like 4 Arven Gadget and like 8 tools.
Yeah.
So that's at least something for a deck builder to enjoy. And hey, Rotom V is a good ability, so you can at least end on a large hand size and figure it out from there.
Evolving Skies. That's not even in format anymore.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's not in format.
Okay. Larry's professionalism. I think this card's pretty terrible. Discarding your hand is always a very, 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 very scary effect. We've seen cards do it in the past. But searching for a Pokemon supporter in basic energy is a really cool suite of things. But the problem is you can't play the supporter, so you're already only getting 2 things from that are immediately accessible. We already have the best ball search I think we've ever had right now. We have so many ways of finding Pokemon, and we have Vessel for basic. Like, I just don't see any reason to play this card basically in any capacity, especially if you're having to discard your hand.
Yeah, I mean, Luke just said loot your card under item lock. I'm pretty sure that's still not great because you need to already have the Pokemon like in your hand. Maybe you can like read the wind afterwards, but that sounds pretty bad. Yeah, like the problem with this is if you're doing it like mid game, your opponent knows what your hand is, so they can change their board accordingly. Like if you don't have boss in hand, they know that. So that could be a problem. Or if they do, they just hand disrupt you or whatever. And oftentimes it's not like you can sit on a supporter the following turn. Like if you need the immediacy of having to, like you're searching a Pokemon to play that Pokemon or the energy to play the energy, a supporter isn't going to win you the game most of the time because the opponent has so many ways of doing other things. So
yeah,
the only thing to bear in mind is that there's like great draw engine Pokemon around and how like Skwovet could empty the hand to barrel up a bunch. Maybe this is like a way that you can end up having like a 10 card deck at the end of the game, similar to Research, but Research is just the better card, right?
100%. And then we have a draw 3 reprint, which I will probably gloss over. The last card is Amaris. Draw 4 at the end of your turn. If you have 5 or more cards, discard your hand. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about discarding your hand when you've just drawn 4?
Not a huge fan of that.
No. Cube card?
No. Certainly a cube card. I'm also going to hate drafting it in cube. I probably would pick this fairly high in cube, but yeah, I guess it depends entirely on the cube. And there will be a decent number of decks that can filter down. Like there aren't that many times where you can end your turn on an over 5 or more card hand. I think reasonably, as long as you're not playing a stage 2, oftentimes you can build a deck in a way that you don't see that downside too often. But also it means that like the more you play of this card, the worse it gets as well, which is weird because it's like trying to be an amassing style effect. And if you are going to have this like dump and draw approach, you may as well be playing Research again because once again, seeing 7 is just generally better if you're happy to dump everything. So long story short, we know this is terrible.
Well, I was going to say not that we thought this was going to be amazing anyway, but also this happens after prize cards as well. So you're actually limited if you take prize cards and it tips you over, you actually just also lose your hand as well. So you sometimes can't even take a knockout without losing your hand. So so that's like the majority of the interesting cards. I am going to switch over just to Justin's website for anything else. Is there anything else on your... Like, I'm probably going to slow down some of the EXs. I think that's basically the only other thing. I think the only other thing is Sylveon mainly that I will, I guess, briefly mention. But I think everything else is...
Have people mentioned Blaziken EX, I think?
This set? No, we're not getting that, unfortunately.
Okay, that's not in the set. Okay. There's Black Belt's Practice, which we haven't talked about, I don't think.
I will actually go to let me go to the trainers first because there's probably like more likely some interesting stuff around here. So Treasure Tracker, some great reprints. We've got lots of A-Spec reprints is really cool. Scoop Up Cyclone, Sparkling Crystal, Roto Stick. You can look at the top 4 and reveal any number of supporters you find there. How do you feel about a 50% of a poker gear, Joe?
Not a huge fan.
No,
we'd have to have a Rotom V-Star style deck that was for amount of supporters, something like a Slowpoke Psyduck GX to come back for this to have any play where you have so many supporters that you can grab 3 or 4 and it's relevant to you.
Yeah, some great research reprints.
Yeah, happy with those. Why not?
Interesting. I saw someone say the other day on social media, this is apparently a common. The researchers are apparently commons in the set, by the way. Research was a hollow at the start of the Scarlet and Violet block. That's how far Research has fallen.
This sounds like the most draftable set, and yet we're never going to be able to open packs of it.
Yeah. Prime Catcher reprint, Max Belt reprint, Yeah, like there's some pretty good reprints in this set, to be honest. Kieran.
Prime Catch reprint is so good.
Yeah. Trumpet.
If you want to go back and build these decks, that's so good.
Yeah,
actually.
it is a really good set. Crispin, Explorer's Guidance, Vessel gets a reprint, which is huge because those things are like gold dots.
Oh man, I need Vessels so badly. I have like 14 and it's just not enough.
Poffins, reprint as well. Black Belt's Practice, during your turn, attacks used by this Pokemon do 40 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon EX. Pretty good damage mod, to be honest. Do you think this ever sees play? Do you think we're in a format where you can afford to play a +40 as a supporter right now?
Well, it's 10 more damage than Kieran, and you lose the switch effect. And Kieran's seeing like no play.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that's a relevant difference because there's 320 on Pult and 310 on Guardy, right? So the fact that 280 is such a big number, that now you can get to 320 is big. So I feel like for exactly the fact that things that hit 28 can now hit 32 is really big, and that's why it's a big difference on Kieran actually.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
And
also,
Pult gets
a
big.
lot of those. I was gonna say also a lot of those decks have Latias now, so they maybe don't need the Kieran anywhere near as much, so they can afford the Kieran to become a black belt instead.
Yeah. So that a lot of that is to say, like someone said in chat, 40 is more than 30, but critically, that difference is that the 28 has been such a crucial number that we've looked for, which means that number comes up all the time, which means it's going to be more relevant than the Kieran.
Arcaludon EX decks in Japan have been using it as a one-off. What does it push Arcaludon to? 260?
Yeah, I think it just lets you get through. But then why would they not play Kieran if they were doing that? Maybe it's because it can also help Dialga.
I was going to say,
that 40 multiplier.
Are there any Dialga maths? Also, the other thing I was going to ask is there was a while where Arcaludons were playing Starmie right to get to 240, so that with that with Black Belt gets to 280, which is Dragos and Lugia's.
Raging Bolt and stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. More good reprints. Terrapagos reprint. Noivern is pretty bad. All of these are pretty bad.
They also gave us bad reprints as well.
Phantom. Yeah, I feel like this set is real feast or famine. You can have a pack that's like insane for a tournament, and then you can get a pack of 1 for 20s, and you're like, oh, well, that's a real shame. I got nothing.
Oh well, I mean, for me, just already seeing Poffin, Vessel, Prime, so good. Yeah,
very, very valuable set in terms of trainers.
And great artwork.
Great artwork as well. Yeah, I've not been appreciating the artwork.
I was looking over. I was looking at some of them earlier just before we started. The Litleo I'm in love with. What was the other one that I really liked?
Oh, there's a Monkey Dory reprint, Joe.
There is a Monkey Dory. Yeah. I really like the the Hippopotos artwork. I love.
Yeah. Sylveon has Safeguard. It's always worth noting that Safeguard exists, but while we have Mimikyu, I'm pretty sure it's almost always worse. But yeah, something to keep in mind if you do go down the Evolutions deck route.
120 hit points, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it deals 100, which is a decent number. If you go down that, like I say, if you go down that Evolutions route, but I don't think there's much to know outside of that, really.
We did talk about Gigas Soda. We talked about it. That was the second card we talked about, I think. Oh no, we talked about it after the EVXs.
We did the EVs, yeah. But yeah, very interesting set. Very feast or famine, like I say. I feel like some packs you're going to be really pleased with. Some packs you're going to be like, bulk.
I don't even know if I'm going to open any packs of this set.
Really?
It's quite sad.
Wow. Yeah. I forgot I managed to pre-order one ETB. So I think that's coming on Friday, which is exciting. And I can fully see that being the only packs I ever open of this set, which is a real shame because there's some fantastic alt arts in this set.
I don't know. Maybe when reprints come, it's really weird. I don't care about any of the Evolutions. I don't think they look good.
Even the alt art ones.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I'm obsessed by the Palafin, the Roaring Moon, and the Raging Bolt. I think they look so good, and the Blood Moon. I really like those.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's just so many better EV.
options,
Like all the V Maxes, I think were better than these. I don't know. I'm a bit of a hater of these, and I think this Umbreon price is going to be so contrived. I don't see the visual appeal of it too much. Maybe I'm just not seeing it in person, so I'm underrating it. But
yeah.
I already think there are like 6 already immaculate, perfect Umbreons for collectors, and I don't think this is like the best one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very fair. Does Justin have the?
Oh, some of the trainers are good. I like the Crispin. That's good.
Does he have the alt arts on his site? Oh, he does. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I've been scrolling through.
Yeah, I like the
visual set list.
Yeah. I do like a lot of the evolutions. I don't like them anywhere near as much as I like a lot of the VMAX ones for sure. But I do quite like them. I think
I like the Jolteon.
I like the 4 masks as well, the 4 Ogopons. I like their symmetry. Man, I like a lot in this set, to be honest.
Fair enough. Maybe I'm just a hater.
I do like a lot in this set, but again, it feels so unattainable right now that I guess I'm trying to not look at it too much to know what I'm missing out on.
That's funny.
The Ceruledge, I think, looks insane. It reminds me of the Hydreigon. I think it's the same artist, and that looks. I haven't seen that in person, but that looks.
How they do the coloring is just so insane. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like. I'm also not a massive fan of the Umbreon compared to the other Umbreon. I like the Espeon a lot. That's probably my favorite one.
Yeah, and Tetsuo Hara, the artist of the Palafin. It's the first time they've done this card, and he's a manga artist.
Yeah, I did see that. That's really cool.
Manga artist,
I really like
that's
that.
Cool.
And then there was the Eevee that I don't think is on this page, but the Eevee that was the food artist that is coming in a box. That's also another really nice one.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very, very nice arts. Really cool set. Really cool set. It's a shame that we'll never get to open any, but hey ho. At least it's not. At least it's not a super competitive set. If it was a super competitive set and we were never able to open any, I would have been pretty sad.
Fuming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been able to pre-order any Journey Together, and that does look like a competitive set, but we'll cross that bridge.
That's going to be a huge issue.
Yeah. But hey.
Especially because it feels like a set that you could easily open a case and still need more after that as a player, because if you want to build every trainer's deck, it's so
and
sad.
like I said on stream earlier on, I think they're all worth building as well. I think like none of them stands out. Well, I think personally, we're digressing a bit. I think Lily seems the weakest so far, but all of them seem.
I haven't sat down to build any of these yet, actually. That might be what I do over the next couple of weeks. Maybe after Birmingham, I'll do some sit down. Actually, no, after Birmingham, we've got a test for EYC. EYC is only like a month away, Jack.
Yeah, I know.
Terrifying.
Fortunately,
how did that happen?
Fortunately, I only own 60 cards right now, so I'm locked in.
Yeah, but do you need to add a Budu or not? No.
No, I don't think so.
Maybe.
Well, we'll find out. Anyway, if you've watched the YouTube recording, thank you very much for watching. And we stream this live over on Twitch. We're going to try and be live a little bit more. So come and say hi, check us out. And thanks for tuning in.